They thought I was just an old man with a Bible. I didn't blame them. In a place like Riverbend, kindness is a scent sharks can smell. You learn quickly to make yourself smaller than your shadow and quieter than your breath. I did both most days. I kept my head down, folded my laundry square, and prayed before breakfast with my eyes open. No one respects a man who bows too long. My name is Eli Grant. I'm 70 years old, a pastor by calling and a widower by grief. I came in on a Tuesday chain-cuffed to men young enough to be my grandsons. The bus smelled like rubber mat sweat and the stale fear of first-timers. When the gates shut behind us, those steel teeth slamming home, I felt the old part of me, the one I never preached about, rise to full attention. Not nostalgia, vigilance. Habits you earn the hard way don't retire just because you do. They walked me past the yard razor wire, shining men circling like weather systems, and into C Block. The block had two gods' time and the man who believed he owned it. They called him Rocco. He wasn't the biggest, just the most certain. Certainty is a dangerous thing when a boy finds it before wisdom does. He noticed me the first day. Everyone did. I was the only inmate who tucked his sheets into hospital corners and lined his boots under the bunk like he expected inspection. I folded my jumpsuit, squared the edges, and set my Bible on the shelf. Rocco sauntered past my open cell door, leaned on the bars, and made sport of my age. "What's that, Grandpa A, bedtime story?" He tapped the Bible with 2 fingers and grinned. "You read us something nice about turning cheeks." I smiled without showing teeth. Books heavy in more ways than one. Hard to swing, harder to dodge. A few men snorted. Humor disarms more than fists do. Rocco didn't like that. Bullies rarely enjoy losing the first round to laughter. In prison, your routine is your shield. I owned the mornings up at 5 push-ups, slow and steady, a towel draped over the bunk rail to practice grip holds. No one recognized breathing deep enough to make my heart remember old cadence. On the 3rd morning, the CO named Sanchez watched me from the tier and shook his head. "You're gonna throw your back, chaplain." "I'm not the chaplain," I said, "just a man who needs the work." Uh-huh. He looked like a man who knew more than he said. Good. There's safety in being underestimated, but not by everyone. The chapel was a repurposed classroom with a cross someone had sanded down so no one could fashion a shiv from it. I ran a short prayer circle there on Wednesdays, nothing fancy. A handful of men came not because they loved scripture, but because the room was quiet and the plastic chairs didn't wobble. One of them was a kid named Devante, 19, all elbows and haunted eyes. He'd done the wrong thing for a woman who didn't deserve it, and it would be years before he believed that had a name besides love. Rocco sent a runner to that circle. Big hands, shaved head, a smile with too many teeth. He sat, stared, and left before amen. Message received. That afternoon in the chow hall, Devante tripped and his tray skated across the floor. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, square of cake gone in a skid. Laughter rose up. Rocco put a boot on the tray and ground the potatoes into paste. "Gravity's a cruel mother, ain't it?" he said. I stood slow enough not to spook anyone, but fast enough to make my point before the COs noticed. "He'll clean it up," I said, nodding at Devante. "And I'll share mine." Rocco looked me over, lips twitching. "Generous, Grandpa. You that way with everything." "Not with time," I said, "that I keep for myself." The block's noise thinned. Prison is a radio tuned to tension, and someone had just twisted the dial. I set my tray on Devante's table and divided the meal with a fork. The fork was dull by design, but I'd eaten with worse under worse skies. "Sit," I told the kid. "Eat what you can." Rocco lifted his foot and flicked the tray. He wanted the room to laugh again to remind me whose name the echo carried. "How about you watch him eat while I take yours?" He reached. My hand moved. Not fast in old age speed isn't a gift, it was precise. I placed 2 fingers on the inside of his wrist, turned, and let his own momentum carry his shoulder where it didn't belong. His knee bent before his pride did. He dropped without grace, a marionette with a cut string. The room inhaled as one. No sound but the plastic fork settling on metal. "Careful," I said softly, "you'll bruise where it shows." The COs shouted. I raised both hands, palms open, scripture under the skin. Rocco scrambled up, rage flooding his face, but he reined it in. Smart. A public loss is a private oath in places like this. He'd come looking when the crowd was gone. That night the block hummed with the kind of quiet that keeps men awake. I lay on my bunk counting breath and years, and asked the Lord for a little mercy on a boy who wouldn't accept any. I asked for eyes to see the right moment and hands steady enough to do what must be done. Prayers aren't bargaining chips. They're acknowledgments I am not enough. Be what I am not. Lights out came, and with it the footfall I'd been listening for. Not heavy Rocco wasn't dumb, but too careful. A careful step is louder than a clumsy one. My door wasn't locked. On B tier they trusted steel and habit to keep us penned after final count. He slid in with 2 men behind him, both trying to fill the space with their shoulders. Evening, Pastor Rocco whispered the title, an insult, not a courtesy. Evening, I said. I swung my feet to the floor, old bones complaining because they knew their lines. If you're collecting, I don't carry debt. Everyone carries something, he said. That much is true. He moved first. He always would. Men like him take initiative because if they ever waited, they'd have to hear their own conscience. His left hand reached for my throat, big sure of itself. I stepped inside, the reach turned and guided what he offered into the bunk rail. It rang like a bell. The second man lunged. I let his weight pass my hip and introduced his ribs to the concrete with a nudge my old instructor would have called a whisper. The third hesitated. Blessings sometimes look like fear, and I gave him a way out with my eyes. He took it backing toward the threshold, palms up, muttering about bad ideas and worse friends. Rocco howled, more offended than injured. He came again, telegraphing rage so plainly even a tired pastor could read it. I caught his fist between forearm and bicep, a simple capture, and pressed 2 knuckles into the notch just above his elbow. Pain is a counselor with a voice everyone understands. He dropped to 1 knee, breath stealing itself. You done? I asked. He tried to spit a curse. What came out was a whimper he'd deny in daylight for the rest of his life. Good, I said. I eased him down, turned him to spare his pride a little, and stepped back so his men, what remained of them, could gather what he'd left around the cell. None of us saw Officer Sanchez until he was already there, flashlight carving the dark jaw tight. On your bunks, he hissed. We obeyed. Even Rocco knew a line when it glowed. The CO's beam found my face, lingered, then moved on. He saw enough to write a report that wouldn't be read. After the shuffle and the whispered threats wore off, the block settled. Devante's voice floated up from the next cell, barely a breath. Pastor, yes, son. You ain't supposed to win in here. Sometimes winning isn't the point, I said. Sometimes it's about telling the truth with your body when nobody listens to your words. There was a long pause. You really a pastor? I am. And before that, I looked at the ceiling, at the paint smoothed by decades of dreams and lies. The old part of me, the one that could take a room apart and put it back together, stood in the doorway of my memory, waiting to be acknowledged. Before that, I said I was a man who did a job you don't brag about. The block exhaled into sleep. Somewhere down the tier, Rocco nursed his arm and his pride and made plans he thought were his own. Above us, the night pressed close to the razor wire like a curious animal. I slid my Bible under my pillow, not for comfort, but for company. The Lord keeps strange hours in places like this. So do men like me. Tomorrow would be worse. It always is after the first truth gets told. But tomorrow was also Wednesday, and the chapel door had hinges that never learned to squeak. I had a circle to open, a prayer to lead, and a choice to make about how much of my past to reveal when the next bully wearing a badge or not decided to test the measure of an old man's faith. Morning at Riverbend arrives like a summons. The fluorescents pop, the lock bars cough, and the whole block inhales on command. I swung my legs off the bunk, rolled my shoulders until the joints remembered their manners, and thanked the Lord for another day with breath in it. A bruise had bloomed across my forearm, where Rocco's knuckles had introduced themselves. I pressed 2 fingers into the ache and smiled. Pain keeps a man honest. Breakfast was powdered eggs with ambition. I carried my tray past Rocco's table without a glance. He sat, stiff left arm tucked, close jaw set, in a way that said he'd practiced a smile and found he didn't own one today. 2 of his boys flanked him, both watching me as if my next step would grant them permission to breathe. I gave them nothing and sat with Devante. "You sleep?" I asked. "Some," he said. His eyes were clearer than yesterday. "Fear will strip a man down. Gratitude will start dressing him again. You?" "Like a guilty man in church," I said, awake and listening. He snorted. The kid could still laugh. That was a mercy. Officer Sanchez walked the aisle slow, the way a rancher checks fence line after a storm. He paused at our table and tapped his baton against his thigh. "Chapel's at 0900 Pastor." "I'll be there," I said. "You running it?" "I'm opening the door and reading a page," I said. "The Lord can run what he likes." Sanchez looked at me a moment too long, cataloging maybe, and moved on. He'd seen scraps like last night before. What he hadn't seen was an old man choosing angles that spared pride more than bone. It's a small thing. It matters. Riverbend's chapel once taught algebra. The blackboard was still there, painted over and hung behind the pulpit, a ghost of equations trapped under beige. When I turned the handle at 9, it swung smooth. No squeak, no drama. Men came because the sound of a door that doesn't complain is a rare comfort. By 9:05, we had 12 plastic chairs filled. Devante, 2 Latinos with knuckle tattoos that spelled a woman's name wrong, a white boy with corn silk hair and the nose of a man who'd lost more than one debate, an older lifer named Crowder who wore his years like a denim jacket, and in the back, a shadow with a flat posture and shoes too nice for an inmate. Warden Norge Investigator. Or something near enough. I read Psalm 27 slow, the way you sip hot coffee, careful not to scald the truth off it. "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear?" The room breathed easier by the 3rd verse. Men don't often get permission to be brave without being loud. When we circled for prayer, I kept it simple. Thank you for a door that opens, for ears that hear, and for the strength to do the next right thing. Crowder said amen in a voice that sounded like gravel being blessed. Afterward, the shadow with the nice shoes stepped forward, hands empty, eyes bored on purpose. "Chaplain," he said. I started... "Habit," he cut in. His voice was educated and tired. "Name's Harlan, State Inspector General's office." He slid a business card across the pulpit. No one in orange gets a business card from a man in a blazer unless something strange is afoot. We do periodic reviews. I sit, I listen, I note deficiencies in programming. He smiled with only one corner of his mouth. Programming seems adequate. "What are you really here for, Mr. Harlan?" I asked. He glanced at Devante, at Crowder at the door. To confirm a rumor, he said that a certain Mr. Eli Grant once held a commission under an agency that isn't fond of its name on paper. I kept my face still. Stillness is a uniform you wear on days like this. "I once held a lot of things," I said. My wife's hand, a hymnal, a wrench on a busted carburetor, plenty of paper. The Lord gave me 2 hands. I used them. Harlan's eyes flicked, measuring where the edges were. "And now you hold a Bible." "Most days it holds me," I said. "We'll talk again," he said, and left as if he'd been called elsewhere by someone important enough to own his attention. He hadn't taken the card back. He wanted me to know he knew. Fine. Truth has a way of ripening in public when it's ready. Devante lingered. "You really used to be..." "I used to be a younger man with a different set of tools," I said. "Tools don't make a man. What he uses them for does." He nodded like the idea had a seat he might give it. "Rocco's boy's been whispering," he said. "He's got something planned." "Of course he does," I said. "Pride doesn't heal, it recruits." By lunch, the block had a hum under it like a transformer that's been asked to light one bulb too many. Rocco didn't look my way. He was delegating. Delegation is the last refuge of a king who can't lift his own sword. He sent a kid named Tyler Broadshoulders, soft eyes, and a man called Big Fred, who wasn't. They boxed me near the laundry room where the cameras had a convenient blind spot known to everyone but the warden. Old man Tyler said, pushing his chest to seem taller, "Rocco says you owe him a conversation." I'll pay you both something better, I said. Advice. Walk away. Big Fred snorted. We ain't here for your sermons. Good, I said, because this is a proverb. They moved in not to get bad training, so I treated them as they arrived. Tyler led with a right hand that would have broken bone if it ever met one. It didn't. I caught his wrist, folded it into itself, and placed him gently on the floor where the whine of surprise stole his curse. Fred grabbed from behind. I sank. My weight stepped through and let his own grip lever him into the dryer door. Metal sang. A CO's boot steps approached fast, then slowed. Sanchez again. He was learning my rhythm. You three done redecorating? He asked without heat. Laundry's quieter when men work alone, I said. Sanchez stared at the bent dryer door, then at Fred massaging a shoulder that would complain to the infirmary by supper. Get out of here, he said to them. To me, you've got a way of finding the blind spots, Pastor. Blind spots find me, I said. I prefer pews. He leaned in, voice low. Whatever you were before you can stop being it now. Son, I said gently, that's not how souls or skill sets behave. Supper came with meat cut to the thickness of rumor. I ate, I read, I waited. After count, I knelt beside the bunk and spoke the kind of prayer a man whispers when he knows the next hour is already walking down the hall to meet him. Lord, I don't ask for victory, just for clarity. And a hand steady enough to stop a boy before he makes himself into a story he can't outlive. The footfall came later than last night. Caution had bred patience. Good. 3 shadows this time and a 4th that clung to the doorframe like regret. The first 3 entered. The 4th stayed outside. He had a shape I recognized, edge not weight. The one who chooses not the one who swings. Rocco stepped into the light with something metal in his hand wrapped in cloth. A handle, maybe. A toothbrush honed to an argument. He kept it low. He'd planned. Evening, Pastor, he said. This time the title sounded tired. I'm here to close the book. You never opened it, I said. He showed me the cloth-wrapped thing, just a flash enough to tell me what conversation we were about to have. I took a step so small it looked like age. It put my right foot where it needed to be. You ever kill a man, he asked. I've helped a few keep breathing, I said. He feinted left. I didn't bite. He came right committed. I saw his shoulder roll before his hand moved, so I addressed the argument at the hinge, not the blade. My forearm met his forearm and wrote a new line over the old plan. The shank skittered under the bunk. I turned his wrist with a twist that asked more than it demanded, heard the little bone protest, and guided him to the floor where the fight went out of him like air from a punctured tire. One of his boys rushed with a roar men make when they want to borrow courage from volume. I gave him the bunk frame and a reason to consider silence in the future. The 3rd hovered undecided. The 4th, the chooser, lifted a hand we all understood enough. Pick him up, the chooser said. They did. His face was clean, his eyes flat. He looked at me like a man examining a tool he might need later. We're done for now. For now is a very specific length of time, I said. He smiled with no joy in it. You don't belong here. Maybe I do, I said. Maybe that's the point. They left the way men leave a room they intend to revisit slowly to own the air, but not so slow as to invite a change in weather. I sat on the bunk, waited for the tremor in my hands to become prayer instead of aftermath, and fished the wrapped shank from the darkness. Toothbrush, melted plastic, a sliver of metal filed into confession. I handed it to Sanchez when he appeared as if materialized from the cinder block itself. He weighed it. You're not the chaplain, he said again, but this time it sounded like he was trying to convince himself. No, I said, just a man who has been asked to do the next right thing more times than he can count. Sanchez sighed deep and human. Warden will want a word, and maybe that inspector. Let them bring their words, I said. I'll bring mine. Back on my pillow, the Bible waited with a patience I didn't deserve. I opened where it fell and found Isaiah talking about men who repair broken walls, restore streets with dwellings. I laughed under my breath at the joke of it. Riverbend had more broken walls than any prophet could patch. Yet here we were, mending what we could, a boy's courage, a bully's certainty, a guard's curiosity, an old man's resolve. Morning would come. The chapel door would open without complaint. And somewhere between Psalm and Proverbs, between Count and Chow, I would decide whether to tell the truth Harlan wanted, that once upon a younger life I carried a badge without a name and a duty without applause. If saying it helped Devante and hurt no one else, I would speak. If it only satisfied a rumor, I would leave it to God and old files. Either way, the block would learn what I already knew. Faith isn't the absence of fear, it's the refusal to let fear write the ending. Warden Mills called me after morning count a room that smelled like floor polish and forms no one wanted to fill. Officer Sanchez stood behind me like a man learning to trust his instincts. The warden sat upright as a rifle. "Pastor," he began, "I'm not—" "You will be if the chaplain keeps calling in sick." His eyes didn't smile. "Inspector Harlan says you run a tidy circle. He also says trouble follows you." "Trouble walks on its own," I said. "I just don't let it sit alone." Background Mills asked. "Widower, 38 years married, small church on County Road 12. Before that?" "Good boots, hard miles," I said. "If the state needs more, ask the folks who bought the boots." Harlan stepped out of a shadow in the corner. "We are asking," he said mildly. "If it's for safety, I'll answer later," I said. "If it's curiosity, file it under sermons I don't preach." Mills exhaled. "Keep your block quiet. If one more shank shows near your bunk, I move you to add seg." With respect, I said that would only make louder men louder. Back in C block, the air had the flavor of rumor copper and sugar. Devante met me at the rail. "The chooser's Kincaid," he whispered. "There's money for anyone who silences the old preacher." "Enough to make boys rich for a week and poor for a decade," I said. "Stay near light." The chapel swelled that afternoon. Men who'd never prayed came because the door that didn't squeak started to mean something. I read from James Quick to hear slow to speak, slow to anger. Afterward, Crowder rasped near the mop closet. "Kincaid likes pretty moves, accidents, kitchen, boiler room. Steam hides sins." "Thank you," I said. "Catch a cold in the library tonight." Supper tasted like cardboard blessed by salt. Rocco sat 2 tables over left arm wrapped pride doing the limping. He wouldn't meet my eyes. At final count, Sanchez lingered outside my cell. "I can't watch your back," he said quietly. "I don't expect you to," I said. "Watch the kids." After lights out, the block turned into a stage. I tucked the Bible under my pillow as a promise. Whatever happened, the last word wouldn't belong to violence. Movement came from the maintenance hatch smart. 2 figures slipped out like ink. A third whispered from the dark. One crouched at the valve behind the sink. Steam. The other carried a cord. "Boys," I said, softly rising, "you've been given bad instructions." "Shut up," the cord said. The valve stuck, the first hissed. I moved before their plan could pivot. The cord hand met a fold it didn't like. The valve man rushed and met my knee, then the sink. He slumped into a lesson. The cord man tried to loop me. I stepped through and let his momentum meet the floor head first. "Enough," said the third voice, flat, temperatureless. Kincaid stepped into the weak light eyes that measured rather than hated. "You must be tired, old man." "Tired and awake," I said. "You're good," he said. "Too good for county time and Bible talk. Who were you before this?" "A husband," I said. "Before that?" "A man who made bad men busy." He seemed pleased by the honesty. "You can't stay in my block. You change the weather." "Weather doesn't ask permission." "You think the warden protects you. He protects himself." "The inspector paper. I protect order." He nodded at the men on my floor. "This is disorder." "Then stop paying for it," I said. We studied each other like 2 chess players tempted to light the board. At last he shrugged. "Tomorrow, yard at noon. I'll tell commissary you earned a pass. Maybe I'll say the old preacher saved me a piece of face." "I'll open the chapel door," I said. He paused at the hatch. "You ever take a life?" "I've taken choices away," I said. "Sometimes that saved a life. Sometimes it didn't." "That's a soldier's answer." "That's one a pastor can live with." They melted back into the crawl. My hands shook. Good. Trembling means you're still human. When it faded, memory brought a younger room, a map on a table, a rookie asking if he was ready. The truth still stands, no man is. We only get ready enough. Morning came without alarms. Harlan stood in the chapel early studying the beige board like it might confess algebra under the paint. Records confirm what I suspected, he murmured. I'll keep it off paper if you keep this place from bleeding. I can try, I said. Places don't bleed. People do. What will you tell them about who you were? As little as feeds hope, I said, as much as starves fear. He nodded, then preach pastor. Men filled the chairs, Devante in front, Crowder at the door. Even Rocco slipped in pride-bandaged curiosity unwrapped. I read from Matthew, "Blessed are the peacemakers." Then I told a nameless story about a young man who learned to end fights before they started, and how the older version of him was tired of that talent because it meant he'd never run out of work. They listened like the sky might answer if we were quiet enough. When we stood to pray, the block seemed to breathe easier, like a bruise touched by salve. Outside, noon crept toward the yard where words become weather. I tightened my laces, squared the edges of the morning in my heart, and asked the Lord to make me small enough to do the big thing right. The chapel door didn't squeak. As it closed, I heard another sound, the faint click of rumor handing me a key I hadn't asked for. Sometimes the only way to lock out violence is to open a different door. The yard at noon is a clock you can smell sun on concrete-cut grass beyond the fence, sweat turning to salt on the back of a neck. The tower watched us with mirrored eyes. A chain-link fence hummed a sermon about boundaries. C-block poured out steady, not rushing the way men arrive when the weather report says interesting. I laced my boots tight and found the patch of shade I'd chosen in my head during morning prayer. Shade keeps eyes honest. Kincaid was already there. He didn't posture. He didn't need to. He wore command like a properly tailored jacket, no flare, all fit. 2 lieutenants stood where they could move first if pride demanded a down payment. Rocco hovered at the rim, arm bandaged, jaw hard. Devante drifted near the handball wall, pretending to be interested in a game that wasn't happening. Officer Sanchez walked the track like a man who wanted to be everywhere at once, and understood he couldn't. He brushed his sleeve against mine without stopping. "Keep it clean," he said to the air. "Cameras. Love noon." Kincaid tilted his head. "Hands," he said. "Hands," I agreed. "And when it's done." "The chapel is off limits," I said. "No taxes, no pranks, no tests. Anyone seeking quiet gets it." He considered, then nodded. "And your kid?" His eyes flicked toward Devante without moving his head. "He isn't mine," I said. "He belongs to a future. Keep his path clear." Kincaid's mouth ghosted toward a smile. "You negotiate like a man who's done it hungry." "I've eaten worse than prison food," I said. "And better." We stepped into the shade. The circle widened, then stabilized. A murmur rose and fell like tide. Someone in the tower shifted metal. Harlan's blazer appeared near the gym door as if grown from stucco. Warden Mills stood at his shoulder, arms folded, jaw a verdict. Everyone important to the story had found a place to stand. Kincaid moved first, not a charge, not reckless, just a test. He wanted my timing more than my head. I gave him small truths, a parry that didn't humiliate, a step that suggested patience, a hand that touched his wrist and said hello without proposing marriage. He read quickly. Good men do. He cut an angle and I let him have it until it became a hole. He reached and found air. We reset. "You're old," he said conversationally. "Every minute," I said. "It adds up to more than reflex." "Respect," he said. "Back at you?" The second exchange lived closer to honesty. He feinted high and drove for the ribs with a hook that would have convinced a younger man to question his choices. I smothered it with elbow and hip, guided his energy past the point where it could argue, and wrote his name in the dust with the back of his shoulder. He rolled, came up, light eyes bright. The crowd inhaled. No one cheered. Yard etiquette says you don't clap for gravity. He came again faster, his awareness narrowing the way it must when men decide something has to end. I didn't outpace him. That season's a memory. I outplaced him, showing him a door, and then closing it gently behind his foot. He stumbled because physics cares very little about reputation. My palm found the center of his chest just long enough to remind him where breath lives. He hit the concrete with enough force to make the tower lean in. I stepped back. "We're done," I said softly. He lay there looking at the sky like a man rereading a paragraph he thought he understood. Then he laughed, quiet, short, real. He sat up, hand extended. I took it and pulled him to his feet, no flourish. "Chapel's yours," he said, "and the kid's path." "Thank you," I said. Rocco's voice cut across the yard, brittle with a courage borrowed from distance. "That's it, old man tricks, and you fold." Kincaid didn't turn. "That's it," he said. "Consider it an audit." Rocco spat toward the dust. Pride makes poor fertilizer. Nothing decent grows from it. He took a step like a man about to reapply for a job he'd already been fired from. That's when the weather changed. Two men from A-block faces, I didn't know posture, I recognized peeled away from the fence and beelined toward the handball wall where Devante had been collecting silence. One walked loose, one walked tight. Loose carried confidence, tight carried a blade. The tower didn't see it yet. Noon glare throws lies underfoot. Kincaid's head ticked an inch. He'd clocked them too. "Your boy," he said. "Everyone's boy," I said. We moved at the same time, not toward a fight, but toward an interruption. Interruption saves more lives than fury ever will. Tight reached first shoulder, dipping for a stab that would have sat under the camera's edge. Devante froze 19, taught by too many songs that bravery always looks like punching. "Down," I said, voice low but trained to travel. He obeyed. That obedience bought him inches. Tight's blade met my forearm where old Callus and New Prayer had agreed to share real estate. I rolled his wrist along a path that ended with the knife snickering into the dust. Loose swung wild at Kincaid and found a past mistake waiting to be repeated. Kincaid's answer was efficient and merciful, a foot that reintroduced Shin to truth, a hand that left Loose choosing between air and dignity and finding neither. Hands. Hands. Sanchez's shout cracked the yard. His baton was out but down an old-school signal that meant, "I'll believe you if you let me." The tower's rifle didn't lower, but it no longer hunted. Harlan pointed, voice flat. "Those two are A-block's problem. Remove them." Coes arrived in a choreography that looked like chaos, but wasn't. The A-block pair went to the ground, cuffed by men who sounded tired of paperwork and grateful the paperwork wasn't worse. Devante pressed his forehead to the wall and breathed like he'd been underwater and remembered air was free. Warden Mills barked without shouting. "All of you back on the track. Now." The yard sorted itself. Mills's eyes pinned me. My office. 5 minutes. Kincaid touched his ribs, then his heart a gesture so small only men in charge notice it. "We're done," he said again. "The bounty's cancelled. Anyone touches your chapel answers to me." "And if they touch me?" I asked. He considered. Then we both made a mistake. Devante walked beside me off the yard, hands shaking, eyes discovering gratitude the way a child discovers a new street. "I froze," he said. "You chose not to move," I corrected. "Sometimes that's braver." In the warden's office, the floor polish had ripened into headache. Mills stood behind his desk like it was a barricade. Harlan watched from the window where the yard looked like an illustration for a report no one would read. "You put your hands on 3 inmates in 2 days," Mills said. "Then 4 if we count noon." "I put my hands between a boy and a funeral," I said. "And between the gangs and your inbox." He didn't smile. He didn't have to. His shoulders loosened a thread. "Inspector." Harlan didn't turn. I saw a conflict de-escalated by a man who knows joint control and centerline denial. I also saw a gang leader choose order over spectacle. No fatalities, no stabbing. Your cameras will love it less than your budget. Mills's jaw worked. "I can ship you to AdSeg on principle." "You can," I said. "Then the chapel door squeaks tomorrow." Sanchez, standing quiet at the file cabinet, spoke up without permission. "Sir, the chapel's the only place the noise goes away." Mills stared at him until speaking felt expensive. Then he looked back at me. "You get one ask." "2, I said. "1 for me, 1 for the block." His eyebrow climbed, but not to the roof. "Name them." "Chapel is neutral ground. No shakedowns, no recruiting. You assign Sanchez to C-block rotation as often as you can." Why Sanchez? He sees what he sees, I said, and he doesn't see what he doesn't need. Harlan finally turned the window, forgotten. Grant, there's also this: we keep your history quiet if you keep the temperature down. What history? Mills asked, irritation and curiosity arm wrestling. The kind that makes committees nervous, Harlan said. Former contractor, long ago, nothing on paper useful to anyone today. Mills studied me like a man deciding whether a tool belonged in his kit or his evidence locker. Sunday service, he said at last. You run it? Official-like, since our chaplain has discovered chronic allergies to responsibility. I'll open the door, I said. God can run the service. Get out of my office, Mills said, which in Warden meant agreement, subject to deniability. In the hallway, Sanchez exhaled like he'd been holding his breath since roll call. You're gonna get me reassigned to the worst block for saying that he said. No, I said. I asked the opposite. He blinked, then grinned without meaning to. Your trouble, Pastor. Trouble walks on its own, I said. We just don't let it sit alone. Back in C Block, a silence met us that didn't feel like fear. It felt like a room waiting to decide something. Rocco looked everywhere but at me. When our eyes finally made contact, he nodded once, tiny, stubborn, sincere. It wasn't apology. It was a permission for himself to pretend he'd offered one. I sat on my bunk and set the Bible on my knees. Isaiah's page still waited repairers of broken walls. I traced the line with a fingertip as if the ink might smudge and prove alive. Outside, the afternoon thinned into the kind of light that makes even razor wire look almost kind. Devante appeared in the doorway, not crossing the line until invited. Come in, I said. He did, and stood like a boy at the front of a church, trying to remember how confession works. Sunday, I said, I'll tell a little more truth about who I was. Not to brag. To buy the chapel a piece longer than a rumor. You'll tell them everything he asked. Just enough to feed hope, I said, and starve fear. He nodded. The choice had been made, and it didn't belong to me anymore. It belonged to the men who needed a story they could stand inside without ducking. That night I slept not deeply, but without rehearsal. The next act would be public. Public endings have a way of turning into beginnings if you let them. I asked the Lord for the right words and for the humility to leave out the ones that made me look like more than a man. The chapel door would not squeak. Neither, if we got this right, would the block. Sunday came quiet, the way redemption sometimes does. C Block smelled of soap and polish. Someone had scrubbed the floor before dawn, probably Devante trading labor for peace of mind. The chapel lights flickered once, then steadied. I stood behind the plastic pulpit, the Bible open to Isaiah again. Men filtered in slower than usual, heads tilted as if entering a new kind of room. Kincaid came first, clean-shaven. Rocco followed, his bandage gone, but his pride still healing. Even the COs leaned on the doorway instead of pacing. Harlan sat in the back with a notepad he didn't use. The warden stayed outside the glass, pretending to check his watch. I waited until the murmurs settled. We've had an eventful week, I said. A few nervous chuckles. Some of you have questions about who I am. Fair enough. I owe you the truth, but only the part that belongs here. I told them a story stripped of names and medals, about a man once sent places where mercy was considered weakness, where decisions were made in the dark so others could live in the light. I told them how that man came home and found that saving others is easier than saving yourself. How he met a woman who taught him to pray without words. How losing her sent him to a small church, and how pride still dressed as duty eventually brought him here. This isn't a sermon, I said. It's a reminder. We are not the worst thing we've done. We are the next thing we choose. The room didn't move. Even Rocco's jaw had forgotten to clench. Devante asked quietly, You really used to fight for the country. I still do, I said. Just change the battlefield. Someone in the back muttered, Amen. Then another. The sound gathered until it filled the room, not loud, just sure. When it ebbed, I nodded toward Kincaid. The chapel stays open, I said. If you come here, you leave rank and colors at the door. Even me. He gave a single nod, agreement enough. Later in the yard, Sanchez handed me a folded paper.